In today's show, it's trade deadline day and also Giannis Watch day 287. Are the Trailblazers done dealing? Are there still more moves to be made? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen, coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. So make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. As Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're continuing our Giannis Watch. It's day 287 of talking about Giannis Antetokounmpo maybe getting traded, except this time there's a real clock to it because the NBA trade deadline is going to come up at 3 Eastern time. That's noon Pacific on Thursday, and you're listening to Thursday, February 5th's program. So the Milwaukee Bucks will have to either accept an offer or push this thing into the summer, and we will... We'll get into that because I think there's major implications about sort of the Blazers' future, quite frankly, with what the Bucks end up deciding to do. Then I want to talk about the Blazers, whether they're done dealing or not. You know, they made one move ahead of the trade deadline, a small piece of business, but a good one. Are we likely to see any more fireworks and what are the sort of choices ahead for them as we head into deadline day? And then there's some big moves around the league. Anthony Davis has got a new team. The Oklahoma City Thunder got a little bit better because the Sixers wanted to get cheaper, and the Hornets continue to make moves. But I think specifically the Anthony Davis deal is one we'll get into. We'll get into all of it a little bit. That's what we do. Let's start with Giannis Watch. It's forever. It's interminable. It reminds me of a less annoying version of covering the Damian Lillard trade saga, although that was like a little more... That was a funnier time on this particular podcast than this. But this matters because the Blazers control the Bucks draft in from 2028 through 2030. They have the right to swap picks with the Bucks in 28 and 30. They have the Bucks outright pick in 2029, although it could potentially be moved on to Washington based on another trade. But still, they have their outright pick in 2029 and swaps in 28 and 30. So what the Bucks do, like if they become terrible all of a sudden, which is certainly on the table, they certainly could be terrible. Like that matters because the Blazers could greatly benefit if Milwaukee which has an expensive roster with a bunch of money owed to Damian Lillard, who plays for the Trailblazers, like clogging up their books. Like it's just there is a very real world where things go sideways for Milwaukee post Giannis, and the Blazers stand to benefit. So is post Giannis, is that a world where it happens? I'll say this. This is just some sort of media literacy for you that I'd like to offer. Giannis gave 2 lengthy, thoughtful interviews to 2 longtime Milwaukee beat writers. And to me, as someone who has worked the beat in various capacities, certainly I'm not doing it like that nowadays, but it strikes me a little bit as a thanks for the memories, y'all. It strikes me a little bit as I appreciate what you've done for me during my time here. I'm going to give you one last really good interview, and then I'm up out of here. We shall see if that is the case. But I will say, noted that not 1 but 2 local interviews with local guys, and it speaks to me and my little former newspaper boy heart. But there is some movement on that front in terms of where Giannis might head to. It was this morning at about 8 a.m. Pacific time. Brian Windhorst was on one of the morning shows, First Take on ESPN. And he reported that the Warriors had previously had put everything on the table. And the Golden State had one of the more intriguing packages because while they didn't have a bunch of like blue chip prospects, they had the most of like the real suitors for Giannis. They had the most draft picks. They could trade up to 4 firsts. They could add a swap in there. Like they could really, really offer an intriguing trade package, made more intriguing by the fact that Steph Curry is 37 years old and they're kind of betting on the post-Curry Warriors being kind of bad. bad, maybe even really bad. And so like I thought, while it wasn't the best sort of players maybe you could get, there was real intrigue just on the volume of picks alone. So that was about 8 a.m. And then at 8:45 p.m. it was reported first by ESPN that Jonathan Kuminga, the embattled Warriors forward, was traded to the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for Kristaps Porzingis. Buddy Hield also goes from Golden State in that trade. And that to me signaled that, nope, Warriors are out, because they would have just held on to Kuminga. There's no way they would have agreed to that trade. There's no reason for them to agree to that trade if they're still in the Giannis hunt, just because they would need it would be valuable to at least not eliminate Kuminga's salary if you're gonna eventually trade him. It was later reported by Anthony Slater of ESPN that indeed the Warriors are out and blah 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 blah. But I think the writing was on the wall as soon as that trade came across my timeline. Take the Warriors off the board. So that means that you're down to just Miami and Minnesota as real teams that are pursuing Giannis. The Knicks basically just like don't have the draft capital, and they probably couldn't make it work. And they're also rolling right now, so they have pulled out of the Giannis sweepstakes. So it's Miami and Minnesota. I mentioned on yesterday's program that Minnesota made a move to get under the first apron by salary dumping Mike Conley. Gave him a little bit of flexibility to make some additional moves. They don't have enough of the draft capital, but if they can move some combination of Jaden McDaniels and likely Julius Randle in order to get back the requisite draft capital that the Bucks would likely require, I think Minnesota could get in the mix. Miami has probably the best single young prospect in Kel'el Ware, although I'm not a big believer that Kel'el Ware is going to be a star, but Kel'el Ware, Tyler Hero, and Miami has some picks to trade. They certainly are a team that could get in the mix, albeit not a particularly awesome trade package for Giannis, but so, that might just be what the market is. And there's a chance that Milwaukee just says, who cares? But why this matters for the Blazers is because, one, like they're just not going to be involved in any Giannis deal, as reported by Mark Stein very plainly on Tuesday, February 3rd, that Giannis's camp had kind of signaled to the Blazers, don't trade for me. I don't want to re-sign there. And so the Blazers, instead of, they were at some point last weekend or on maybe Saturday, I believe that was January 31st when the news came out, saying, we don't want to be little brother. We'd like to be part of this, of the big old shopping spree. But now the Blazers are probably destined to be third-party facilitators at best. But even then, like, they're probably not going to give up all of their picks for Jaden McDaniels. That would be a crazy choice to make. Would they give up all of their picks for Julius Randle and Jaden McDaniels? And would the Bucks even want that? In Miami, as facilitators, like what would the Blazers want? They certainly didn't want Miami's young players before. Would they want them now? I don't think Kel'el Ware makes much sense in Portland specifically. But again, a talent. So what Brian Windhorst had reported was that Miami and Minnesota, were out sort of scouring the market to see if they could beef up their Giannis package. I think the real truth of this is that this either happens, right at the deadline, right around the final minutes of the deadline, because the Milwaukee and the Giannis's camp kind of push to the very end, so they have to absolutely make a decision, or Milwaukee says, you know what? We didn't get the offers we wanted. It doesn't matter. Importantly, Milwaukee has not released a timeline on Giannis Antetokounmpo's calf injury. And let me just tell you, if he is not traded, I bet that calf injury is going to linger for a long time. I bet it's going to really hang around while Milwaukee slowly drops in the standings. They almost lost this evening in hilarious fashion, but ended up beating the Pelicans despite their best efforts to lose in regulation. So that's where the Blazers find themselves on Giannis watch. I think it matters because, like, if the Bucks say they like really want Jaden McDaniels, right? How good is a Jaden McDaniels, Miles Turner team? Like, to again, I think it's relatively easy from between now for the Bucks to not be like one of the 3 worst teams in the league, maybe not one of the 5 worst teams in the league, but from where they are now to to climb out, to not end up being like still one of the, like pretty comfortably one of the 7 or 10 worst teams in the league, even with all of the right effort, that might be difficult, right? Depending on what they get back, what they prioritize, and then how they make moves beyond that. I think it's, I said this a bunch and gotten some pushback, but I think it's really easy to avoid one of the bottom 5 worst records in the NBA if you are either like just not as stupid as the Pelicans have been over the last 8 months, or just like mildly incentivized to win. The Pels are just, some teams are bad, not on purpose, right? But like the Pelicans and Kings exist. But if you run like even moderately well, you can avoid some of the stuff. And obviously some teams are bad and have bad luck. But like what the Bucks prioritize getting back will kind of inform how valuable the Blazers picks end up being. Because certainly the Bucks could be very, very stinky. But also they could end up being like, it could end up being the 11th pick in the draft or whatever. And the 4th pick and the 11th pick is a pretty big gap if you're talking swaps in 2028. And then we'll see what ends up with Milwaukee and beyond. But unfortunately, if you are a Blazers fan, you do have to pay close attention to what happens with Giannis, because it's not just whether the Blazers get involved, it's what Milwaukee's ultimate package is in terms of like immediately helpful talent and or pieces you could trade to like become better in the near term. If the Bucks do sort of have this incentive, like, well, we don't have our picks, let's go be mediocre. Like, do they have a path to go be mediocre, or like, are they just going to be bad? And it's going to be very beneficial for the Blazers, either as swaps or as eventual trade pieces. Okay, that's Giannis Watch. I want to talk about the Blazers. Are they done doing deals? Is this it? Is there more to come from Portland? Let's talk about what they have done and what is sort of left, at least for them to check off the ledger. We will do that in the second segment. Join me there, won't ya? First, though, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Indeed. Hiring isn't just about finding someone willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed Sponsored Jobs is the move. Because instead of hoping the right person stumbles across your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to the people who fit your specific criteria, the skills, the certifications, and the location you want. If you're hiring, you don't want just, quote, someone who'll help. You'd want someone with real experience who can jump right in and be an asset. It saves you time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches if you're using Indeed's sponsored jobs. And you're going to get your posts seen by the people who really, really, really fit what you're looking for. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job to the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Today's program is also brought to you by the good folks over there at TurboTax. It is tax season, but that doesn't mean it has to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with your local TurboTax expert, either in person or online, and they're going to handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms. You can upload your documents on the go and then go about your day and get updates right in the app as you are doing whatever it is you're doing that isn't taxes. And for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file your taxes last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right. Thanks for making this show your first listen. If you are living that everyday lifestyle, you listen 5 days a week, particularly if you are an audio listener, I'm talking to you. Join the Everydayer Club. If you do it by tomorrow, February 5th, you can use the promo code DEADLINE and get your first month for free. Otherwise, $5 a month or $50 a year, you get access to an ad-free audio feed for this episode. Plus, you can join me in the Discord where we're chopping it up. We're arguing about Blazer trades and all of those things with me and your fellow Blazers fans. We're not always arguing. Sometimes we're sharing insights about the world of Blazers hoops. Okay, speaking of the world of Blazers hoops, is this team done doing deals? They done? This is done. They traded Duop Reith and some second round picks for Vit Krejci. I think that's a good bit of business. Krejci at least addresses a need. The level at which he will address that need remains to be seen, but they needed shooting. He is a bona fide shooter. He's on a minimum contract, and if he's helpful, you can have him under contract for a couple more years. That's a nice little piece of business, but is it the only piece of business the Blazers are going to do? I guess that is the question. The other question is, what do they do with the two-way guys? That has been sort of lingering here. It's like, it seems pretty clear that Sidy Cissoko is a big part of the plan. With the return of Blake Wesley, Caleb Love didn't play a ton in the Blazers' last game against the Phoenix Suns, and there's a world in which with Wesley back on the roster and the return of Scoot Henderson, who I think is likely to make his debut this weekend when the Blazers play host to the Memphis Grizzlies on Friday and the Saturday, back-to-back against the same team. I bet the Blazers marketing department loves that. I bet season ticket holders love that. I bet podcasters love that. I actually don't care about it too much. I am my own man. But with Scoot's return and Blake Wesley's return, does Caleb Love, can they just sort of delay the decision on Caleb Love? That would be one reason why they wouldn't need to make a move either in the trade market or as a roster spot, to cut a roster spot afterwards, because they could just put Love to... It's 50 games on the active list, isn't 50 games played, so it's 50 games on the active list. So they could just, if Scoot's really going to be available and an every night player, and Blake Wesley's going to be available and every night player, same with Drew Holiday, there can be nights when you probably do put Caleb Love on the inactive list, and you just don't. You say, okay, we're going to move. He's not going to play anyways. He'd be our fourth guard or whatever, because you also have Shaedon Sharpe eating up those minutes, and also they play some minutes when they're big if Denny's back. I think that is a way to skirt it. So that could be a reason why they don't make a move, just because they're going to get healthier. There is a funny, I think the biggest move we made at the trade deadline is getting Scoot Henderson back. That could be coming, except Scoot hasn't made his debut. So I guess Joe Cronin won't be able to say that when he speaks to the media. But the other options are for the Blazers. Either, they could make whatever move, right? They could still, they probably could, they could probably use some center depth if they wanted to move some chairs around. They could use probably another center, unless you just say, hey, listen, we're gonna roll with Young Hansen as the third center no matter what. And when Rob doesn't play on back-to-backs, they've got I believe 2 left after the All-Star break, or after this Memphis game, they have 2 left. Memphis couplet, I should say. Memphis back-to-back, they have 2 remaining. So you could say, okay, hey, there's only 2 more sets and we think Rob's going to be good. So we're just going to roll with Hansen in those minutes, then whatever. But they could probably use some depth regardless at that spot. So maybe they make a move. I think the most tradable sort of mid-level salary is Matisse Thybulle, and that could be used because he makes enough money at about $11 million, could be used to bring back an impactful veteran if the Blazers sweeten it with the right type of draft capital, or are willing to take on some money that other teams want because Matisse Thybulle is an expiring contract, and that is usually how the best use of expirings is, to take on multi-year contracts, or someone who's entering free agency that the other team just doesn't want to pay. That is the other path. So I think there's a world where they do that. Do they have any other tradable parts? They're right up against the tax line. They owe, they can't trade their own first round picks because they owe a pick still protected by the great hubris trade of Larry Nance, still protected through 2028. Then, so you're talking trading the Bucks picks, which you probably don't want to move until you know the deal with Giannis, or the unprotected Orlando 2028 pick. But Orlando kind of stinks this year, making trading that pick a lot less appealing because hey, hold on to it. Maybe they're bad. Maybe it's not going to work out there, and it's going to be it's going to end up being a really interesting prize. So, they don't have a lot of wiggle room financially. They don't have obvious tradable parts, because they could trade Rob Williams, but they're going to be really hurting for a center if they do that. So you're going to need to get one back in return one way or another, or just roll with Hansen and deal with it. And even then, you would still need a third center for sure, but you could probably find just a tall person somewhere to be your nominal third center. So, I think it's Tease, and then it's you're talking about sort of, Ron Rupert doesn't really have trade value. I don't think you're going to find takers for Jeremy Grant or Drew Holiday unless you do something really elaborate and probably throw some picks in there to make it happen. Conceivably, Drew Holiday is, could be valued, but he's really struggled since he came back from injury. He also missed a bunch of games with injuries, 35 years old, and owed a bunch of money. So I don't think the Blazers have a ton of tradable appeal on the roster. They do not have a bunch of financial wiggle room to like take back the right type of money, although they have some space to do so if they need it and stay below the tax line. And, and they don't have first to kind of like make it happen. So I do think there is a world in which they are indeed done. Coming into the trade deadline, I mentioned that I kind of guessed that nothing was a fairly likely scenario. They made a minor move. That addressed a need, but they could be indeed done. Unless there's the big Giannis trade and they can get in as facilitators, or there's a big Giannis trade and they just watch from the sidelines and say, Milwaukee got worse and we like this bet we're making on Milwaukee staying bad. And sort of that's the world, and they don't and they move forward from there. So if I had to guess, I would say, yeah, I bet the Blazers are done dealing, but certainly there's myriad scenarios where they make some other moves, albeit I would bet they are relatively minor just based on where they are financially and sort of what they actually have to trade out there on the markets. Who wasn't done dealing was the freaking Washington Wizards of all people. They got in the mix in a pretty stunning trade, quite frankly. Let's talk about that and some other moves of the day, because the league was out there making moves. This was not your quiet deadline. Join me in that third segment. We will talk all about it. First, though, let's talk FanDuel. Super Bowl's here. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. Super Bowl 60. It's here, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. So no matter who you're rooting for or whether you just want to build that last same-game parlay, this is the big one where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's a big gambling holiday. It's also a big football game when you might be with some friends and family. And if you are with friends and family and you're a new customer to FanDuel, you can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. Okay, another big day. This was, okay, last year, the trade deadline. Join me in the Wayback Machine. We're gonna go back to February of 2025. It was supposed to be this big deadline because other team. This was the last sort of chance before things got a little bit trickier with the aprons, and this was your chance to make moves, and this was going to be your big fireworks. And then at the draft, it was going to be last summer. It was going to be like, well, this might be the busiest day of the year, and for the draft. This was reporting from multiple outlets. I'm not singling anyone out. Multiple people. National reporters. And then heading into this trade deadline, the speculation was that it might be a quiet deadline. And then it was really quiet. There was, through Sunday, there were 3 trades across the entire league for the entire year. And then this thing got popping. And today it kept on popping where, Jared McCain, a recent first-round pick in his second season, because the Sixers don't want to pay the tax, because they don't pay the tax, they salary dumped Jared McCain to the Oklahoma City Thunder, where, he's, I don't know how big of a role he'll eventually have, but in the first 30 games or whatever, 25 games of the Jared McCain experience coming out of Duke, he looked like he was going to win freaking Rookie of the Year. Has not been that good since coming back from his injury, but a bet on talent for a young player for the champs, a somewhat surprising deal. The Hornets made a swing, got Kobe White from the Bulls, as the Bulls continue to just sell low and wait and sell everybody after their peak value, and they get back Colin Sexton, Ousmane Dieng, and the 3 second rounders. The Hornets, part of that deal was a third team was kind of roped in, and I guess it was technically a separate transaction, but Mason Plumlee leaves the old friend from the Hornets and ends up with the Thunder, where he's going to get waived. And the Hornets also received Mike Conley in that deal, and he very well may get waived, that is. But the big one, I guess, like Chris Paul got traded from the Clippers at long last, and he might get waived, or he might just weirdly have the weirdest retirement year you could possibly have. But the big one, the stunner of the day, is that the Mavs traded Anthony Davis. Not that they traded him, right? It was well reported that that was, something that they wanted to do. And then there was some suitors who might be interested. And there was, is he going to end up, potentially, is he going to end up in Atlanta? Nah, he's not going to end up in Atlanta. Could he end up in Toronto? No, he's not going to end up in Toronto. He's heading to our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., the district. Wait, what? What? The Wizards traded for Anthony Davis. That's for real. They traded nothing. Chris Middleton, H.A. Johnson, who's now been traded twice since getting drafted in 2 years ago. Malachi Brannon, former Spurs great, played for the Wizards for a part of a season. Chris Middleton, embattled vet, and Marvin Bagley III, who rightfully goes back to Dallas like he should have maybe in the 2018 draft. They also get 2 picks, first-round pick in 2020 from the Oklahoma City Thunder in 2026. That's going to be the 30th pick in the draft, and a top 20 protected pick in 2030 from Golden State. I don't love this trade for the Wizards, but the price is so low. Who cares, really? Like maybe, Anthony Davis is 33 and maybe they're going to give him this fat contract in the fall and it's immediately going to be like, what are you doing, Wizards, right? Like, I think I will reserve judgment on what the contract that Anthony Davis ends up playing on in Washington, right? Like if he gets, $55 million a year to be 35-year-old Anthony Davis, that's a nightmare. But, depending on what that is, like they got Trae Young for very little, CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert, and Anthony Davis for very little. Two very meh firsts, like the probably the 30th pick in the draft, and then maybe the 21st pick in 2030. Now, who knows what the 2030 draft will look like, but the long history of the league suggests that it's relatively hard to land a good NBA player in the 20s. It happens every so often, but it's hard. That's hard. It's hard to do. It's pretty unlikely. And the Wizards are just all of a sudden they're hitting the gas, and you we've seen this now with Utah after some years and being in the cellar of saying okay, next year we're going to go for it. The Wizards, who I thought were probably going to slow play this at least for another full season, they might end up with one of the first 3 picks in the draft. If they really get that pick right and they have Anthony Davis plus their young core, I like some of their young players. I like Trey Johnson. I like Keyshawn George. Bob Carrington's kind of mad to me, but I guess he's talented enough. Bilal Coulibaly's an interesting defender. He's probably a backup long-term in my eyes just because of the limited offense. But Sarr is a really intriguing big. Play him next to Anthony Davis. Trae Young is a really fun pick and roll player when he's healthy. I don't know. What are you going to get? If you get 60 games of Anthony Davis, he might be good in the East. He might be good. That might be the 5th best team in the East. Just all of a sudden. They also might be injured and be bad again, but we shall see. But I think, notably, now we've seen 2 teams in the West, flipping back to the Mavs, the Mavs are now going to pivot and be bad, and add them to the Memphis Grizzlies, who are going to pivot and be bad. So there are teams that were sort of kind of in the Blazers' range relatively that you thought moving forward, okay, yeah, these teams are going to be, it's going to be just the West is going to stay good forever because even the kind of mediocre teams are still good. It looks like that's not going to be the case. At least the Jazz are going to be on the rise, so you get a team from below trying to make a climb, but 2 teams that are going to 2 teams that are actively going to get worse. Obviously, the aging teams in California, I think they're question marks. Although the Lakers will probably be pretty good as long as Luka is around. So I think just sort of the broader landscape. While the Blazers haven't, they're not going to. The upper echelon of the West is still very, very hard to get into. But the messy middle of the West continues to get softer for the Blazers, and I think that is sort of broadly good news. Although the goal isn't to be comfortably the 7th best team in the West. I think you got to aim a little higher, and hopefully the Blazers will here in the near future. Tomorrow's deadline day. Tomorrow is deadline day. We will see what happens. I will whatever happens with the Blazers, one way or another, we will recap everything that goes down. Depending on some other moves, I've got some fun episodes cooking. And I'll tell you this, if you were in the Everydayer Club and you were in our Discord chat, you would know what fun episode I might have cooking for tomorrow, because I told my Everydayers in the club what I might do for Friday's program, because those are my folks. So come join the club, be one of my folks, get a little sneak preview of stuff, and be able to chat with me directly there as well. Link is in the show notes if you want to join the Everydayer Club. And get on it quick, because you could get a free month and see if it's something you're into. Okay, that'll do it for today's show. Come back for tomorrow's show, deadline day. Tell your friends about the podcast. I appreciate you listening. I will talk to you soon.